Hey guys, welcome back to the fourth and final episode of the Nursery Remodel Series. And this week's episode, we're finally going to tackle this barn door. Let's get to work.
All right, so in terms of the material for this project, we are going to be using, you guessed it, poplar hardwood. I got 4 boards that are 8 foot long, 6 inches wide, and about 1.5 inches thick.
Okay, we have our poplar and we're ready to get started. But first, the lighting in here is pretty bad. And I just updated it, so check this out. Isn't that difference insane? I bought these on Amazon for 45 bucks and there's no electrical work required. It's super simple. So if you need lighting and you don't want to do electrical work or you don't know how to do electrical work, it's literally simple as plugging into an outlet, attaching them to the ceiling with some screws, and you're good to go. I'll leave a link down to these below because this is amazing. All right, with that impromptu dance session out of the way, let's start milling up these boards so we can make a barn door.
So milling here is an optional step. I just like to include it, that way I can double check and make sure that all of my boards are exactly the same thickness. That way when they glue up, we don't have any funky gaps. Now we're getting them ripped. The measurements here are arbitrary, but I decided to go with 5.5 inches for every board. That way it all looked consistent. And these boards had a bit of tension. Now once I have everything cut and measured, I start to lay everything out, and wait a second, got a notification. Just broke 300 subscribers. Thank you so much, guys. That's awesome. I know in the grand scheme of YouTube, 300 subscribers is definitely small potatoes, but I am super pumped about it, and I'm so grateful that you guys are along for the ride. Now, once everything was laid out and I knew where my pieces were going to come from, I could get them rough cut with the track saw and then take them over to the table saw and the crosscut sled to get things brought down to their final length, cleaning up the first edge, dropping the stop block, and then rotating it around to clean up the second edge.
Okay, so we've got our stiles cut, not to length, they're oversized for now, that way we can cut it later after everything's glued up. But our rails are cut to the exact length so we can mark for dominoes. I'm gonna use my domino to pull this together. You could use dowels, you could use biscuits. I guess you could use pocket hole screws and just hide them on the back because no one will see the back of this closet door because it's going up against a wall. So whatever works for you, use what you have. I have a domino. I like the joinery method, so I'm gonna use that. But I went ahead and got everything marked up, using some spacer blocks, clamped those in place, and then clamped my middle rails in place. That way I could just make sure that everything was totally evenly spaced, because if one of these is wider than the other, the human eye will pick that up almost every single time, and that's the last thing we want, is people saying that we goofed on this, because it's going to be a permanent fixture in this home. So when you can, I strongly advise cut some spacer blocks, something like MDF, scrap ply, whatever you got will work really well, and just mock everything up and you'll save yourself a good headache later.
Now, a quick tip here, whether you're using a domino or a doweling jig or beadlock, make sure you're actually labeling where each point connects with either a shape or a letter or a number or whatever. That way you're not rearranging the stiles or the rails as you're going to assemble things. Now, this is a good example here of why even having some of the best joinery techniques don't work if you don't do them well. My plate wasn't even, and the middle domino mortise got a little high, but that's okay. I just skipped that one and only used 2. And quite frankly, using 3 for every connection was total overkill. Okay, dominoes have been mortised out. Oh, the tenons are in. This is just a dry fit. There's no glue in this, but it's looking really good. Now, it's late. Made a lot of progress tonight, so I'm gonna wait until tomorrow to actually glue everything up. And I want to go through and add my edge profile along all the interior walls before I glue it up. Because if I waited until after I glued up, then I'd be running my router bit here, the bearing would catch in the corner, and I wouldn't really get a clean line there. So instead, I'm gonna use a chamfer, of course. Then I'm gonna run my chamfer all the way up the side and go all the way around the rails. So there'll be a little indent here that I think will look really clean and modern, which is the whole goal for this closet door. So
looking good. Let's get back at it tomorrow. All right, so it's the next day and I got everything out of the clamps. The dry assembly went really, really well. All the spacing looked good. Now we're going to use our chamfer and add our edge profile. Chamfer. Now we're gonna use our router and add a chamfer edge profile. One of the things I used to do a lot when I first got into woodworking, and I still occasionally do sometimes, is I'll get everything pulled together, I'll glue it up, and then I forgot to add the chamfer or the profile edge, whatever it is, and I'll go back and try to add it, and you can't because this little ball bearing hits inside corners. You can't really get the profile into the corner the right way. It ends up looking really clunky, and you got to do chisel work and sanding, and it's just not as good as it could be. So I'm gonna do what I did on the closet to Butler Pantry video. I'll throw a thumbnail up for that. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But I had to remake those doors for this exact same issue. And I really like the way that the chamfer's met up and how that looks. So we're gonna go ahead and fire this up and get these cut before we get it glued. Let's do it.
And with all of the chamfers added, we could look to getting everything glued up and assembled. Now this is a bit of a race against the clock with a lot of different dominoes and a lot of different mortises. So have everything mapped out before you start this process. That way you're not racing around trying to find the right clamps or trying to refill a glue bottle, which I had to do. Thankfully, it all came together well, but a little bit of planning work would save you a little bit of headache here.
All right, so this has been in clamps for about 6 hours, so everything should be nice and cured up. We're gonna take the clamps off, we're gonna do some sanding, we're gonna cut the total length to the length that we need for our closet opening, and then we're gonna work on routing out the grooves in the back to drop in our plexiglass. Let's do it. Okay, so we're at the point now where we need to route out our rabbets that the plexiglass is going to fit in. I've got the 3/8" rabbiting bit installed in the router, so we're good to go on that front. Also, random fact, I've gotten a lot of reports from different people commenting and on social media saying that the volume has not been very great whenever I'm recording from my phone. So I'm making sure that I'm miking up every single time. So if the volume's been better in this video, be sure to let me know down below in the comments.
Now, even though this is a heavy duty router, I am taking this in about 4 passes per opening or per window. That way I just didn't put too much strain and it gave me a nice clean edge. Now, because the router bit is round, there were some rounded corners and the plexiglass is going to be square. So I get to showcase my exceptionally mediocre chisel skills and square up those corners. Though I think it gets a little bit better as I do all the corners. You tell me. As I mentioned before, we opted to use plexiglass in lieu of actual glass for this project, and that was for 3 different reasons. The first being, plexiglass is way cheaper, which is obviously preferable. The second, plexiglass is a bit more durable and less likely to cause damage when it breaks than actual glass is. And the final reason is plexiglass is easy to cut with regular power tools. Otherwise, I'd have to go to a glass shop and have them cut it, and the measurements and everything that goes on with that would just make it a little bit complicated and increase the option for air. Now, we did want these to be frosted, so I grabbed some 220 grit sandpaper and just give it a nice sanding on both sides to diffuse the image and make it harder to see inside the closet, because chances are that closet will not stay clean. Now, believe it or not, we're already on to finish. Now, like we did with the dresser, we're keeping things real simple here with General Finishes Armor Seal and a satin, just using a foam brush, wiping on a heavy coat, letting it sit for 10 minutes, and then coming back and wiping off the excess. I did a total of 3 coats on all sides of the door. Now, I went back and forth on how I wanted to attach these plexiglass panels to the door. I decided to use scrap plywood and just brad nailed those into place, but I later found out that you could see the plywood from the front of the closet door, which looked bad, so I knocked those out, and when I did, the brad nails themselves stayed in. So I just hammered those brad nails flat against the plexiglass, and that actually held it in just fine, and there was no shadow lines to see, which I was pretty happy about.
All right, let's take a look at our BarnDoor hardware. This is from Smart Standard. They are not a sponsor. I'm not even sure what else that company does. They're just one of the cheaper models that I found on Amazon. I've used this one probably about 3 or 4 times. It's really easy to use, really quick to put together. So let's take it out of the box and see what we're looking at.
That's good.
So here's a close-up at the kit. Everything's pretty straightforward. There's a couple pieces here that I don't remember exactly what they do, but we'll get into that when we start to install. So basically, your main component here is going to be the bar. It comes in 2 pieces, probably for shipping purposes. You can see at this end, there's like a little fork piece there, and at this end, there's an absence of a fork piece. It's because those fit together on the wall, and then one of your big lag bolts will go through that little hole that it makes when it connects. You can see there's the outside of the hole there. So the lag bolt will go through there and kind of pin those two together. On the back side between the board and either the wall, if you're gonna go straight to the wall, or if you're gonna do what I'm gonna do, which is add a header board, there's this little spacer gap here, which will pull the track away from the wall and keep your door from scratching the wall. And it'll also give you a wider surface area to place against the drywall. That way you're not sinking into your drywall in one spot and losing your grip. So other than that, you've got your wheelies here that slide pretty smoothly. They're not too bad. And then you got your bumpers that keep the door from going off the track once everything's set up. The bolts that go through the, I'm gonna call them wheelies. I don't really know what these are called. Through the wheel component, go through that into the door. There's some other bolts here that I think are just a different size. If you have a thicker door, your lag screws here that'll go into the studs in your wall. This is a divider that goes in a channel that is supposed to be routed in the bottom of the door to keep it from pulling away from the wall. I've personally never had that issue, so I don't ever really use this piece. We've already talked about those. I don't quite remember what these are, and these are just some heavy-duty drywall anchors if you are trying to go straight into the drywall and you can't hit a stud with all the pre-drilled holes. But again, we're going to be using I think it's called a header board. If it's not, I'll put a little cap here with the correct wording of what it's called. But basically, a solid piece of board that you drive into the studs of your wall. That way, that's anchored into the studs, and then you can anchor this to that board using these holes if these holes don't match up with your current studs. Let's install.
Now, if you're wondering why the original door has a hole in it, be sure to go follow me over on Instagram and catch all the goofy reels that I put up along with the videos that I'm posting here. Now, the instructions for this kit were pretty straightforward. They give specific measurements based on their hardware and the height of your door, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about how that works. I will just say if you are using a backer board, to go ahead and mark out your studs with blue tape and drill in 2 different anchoring screws at every stud. Then I like to use a level to decide where exactly that bar is going to go. Next, use a square to make sure that your wheelie components are not moving on you. Mark those holes and drill those out with a 3/8 inch drill bit. Now that I'm saying this, I realize I am kind of telling you exactly how to install this, so we'll just keep this train going. So like we mentioned before, what I'm calling the spacer tube goes with those lag screws with the washer, and that'll go between the bar and your backer board, or between the bar and the drywall if you're going directly into the drywall. Now, hanging this up with one person was a bit of a pain in the butt, but if you got a second pair of hands, that'll really help you out. If not, grab a clamp and be patient, and you can get it done. And of course, with any install is the classic strength test. This seemed to hold up pretty well. So, moving on, we got the door on. We're going to add our bumpers to keep it from sliding off of the track. And then I recalled what these little guys are for. These are spacers that go on top of the door between the door and the bar to keep it from coming off the track. I hid mine behind the wheelie component so you didn't see them. And within about 10 minutes of having this up there, Amy started pulling on it, so we did add the little anchor in front of the door since I didn't route the groove. Now let's take a look at these befores and these afters.
Alright guys, that's going to do it for this week's video, and that's going to wrap up the Nursery Series remodel. If you'll take a trip down memory lane, you'll recall that we knocked out the closet built-ins, we updated the accent wall, we built the custom dresser / changing table, and we just finished the modern sliding barn door. I could not be happier with how this all came together, and it's not a moment too soon because we're about 3 weeks from when the little lady's supposed to be here. As always, like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, and we'll see you in the next one.